The story begins in 1957 with an editorial titled "Alcoholism, a National Emergency," written by William Menninger, who was one of the founding psychiatrists of modern psychiatry. And he wrote, "If alcohol was a communicable disease, a national emergency would be declared." And when you think about the mobilisation of the health system over the winter time in New Zealand just gone by, for how many deaths? We got 18 deaths from swine flu. And this year we're going to have over 1,000 deaths from alcohol. There's a mismatch between the mobilisation of concern in New Zealand around a public health problem that is discounting alcohol. All the family violence you see, all those poor babies and young kids that are being bashed. How long is this country going to allow this kind of thing to continue? It's an issue that's been under the carpet, and maybe it's time it was brought out into the open. Alcohol? No. New Zealand apparently is in the grips of a serious drug epidemic, and it's the methamphetamine epidemic. Alcohol, in fact, is a drug epidemic that's more than 50 times as big as methamphetamine. And I want to contend that if alcohol was a new drug, a national crisis would be declared. Alcohol is no ordinary commodity. And secondly, the presence of business corporations. Corporation, an ingenious device for obtaining individual profit without individual responsibility. Very apt quote about a century ago, and it's quite prophetic in some ways, because we've seen in the world over this last 100 years the rise of business corporations to the extent that some of them are more powerful than national governments. The incestuous relationship between government and big business thrives in the dark. The alcohol industry actively markets alcohol to young people. If you can get these young people drinking alcohol in reasonably large quantities on a relatively frequent basis, then you've got them as customers for life. For the first time, very recently, 2007, in Australia, an alcohol industry insider came out and admitted something that the alcohol industry has continued to deny in public, and that is that they sweeten the drinks, and I've got some examples here, in order to lure young people into drinking. One of my favourite alcoholic drinks is Bailey's Irish Cream. That's why I think I'm going to enjoy this. This looks to me like Bailey's for babies. It's a 13-year-old drink. It's a grooming drink. It's got half a standard drink, a little sneaky little bit of alcohol in there. The relative safety of drugs is measured by a thing called the safety ratio. It's derived by dividing the lethal dose of a drug by a typical recreational dose. And you may be able to see that ethanol at 10 is the same as methamphetamine and is closer to heroin than it is to ecstasy. We have this Class B equivalent drug being sold at discounted prices, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day at times, 363 days of the year, and often by young people being the shop assistants. Just imagine if that was ecstasy at discounted prices, in our supermarkets. There'd be an outrage, wouldn't there? But that is the situation we have with alcohol. It's a Class B equivalent drug. We need to find some new middle ground between two extremes in terms of the supply and sale of alcohol. On the one hand, we've got excessive commercialisation of alcohol. That's where we are at the moment. At the other extreme, of course, is prohibition. We don't want to go there. We want to find some new middle ground between these two extremes. So the 5+ solution, there it is: price, age, accessibility, advertising, drink driving countermeasures, and treatment opportunities. The relationship between price and how much alcohol is consumed is very clear. There's almost a mirror image of the two graphs. And what we have to do is, first of all, introduce a minimum price per unit of alcohol. And that will produce a foundation on which The severe cost-cutting in supermarkets will come to an end, and it's a foundation on which the government can then slowly increase excise taxes to make further gains in terms of reducing drinking, particularly heavy drinking. There's been over 400 alcohol injury crashes amongst 15 to 19-year-olds since the law brought in a lowering of the drinking age in 1999. Normalising and maintaining the heavy drinking culture. Just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's not drug pushing. And these drug pushers are really pushing it hard. $200,000 a day of drug pushing in New Zealand. And where is it going? Well, first of all, it's going into some very clever advertisements. The TUI ads, the iconic TUI ads, they're fantastic, aren't they? I saw this one just the other day, that's why I put it up. I just rang to say I love you. Yeah, right. And as we say, yeah, right, isn't there a sort of a nice feeling that you feel? You feel so smug and clever, and you're part of the TUI in-group, aren't you? It's got you. Sex sells. Distracting the boys from the task at hand since 1889. And equally using pretty young women to market alcohol to women, young women, 13 through 30. Pursue your daydreams. Pursue your night dreams. It's Friday night, time to light the fuse. Librarian by day, Bacardi by night. We've got to reduce alcohol accessibility two ways. One is through outlets and the other is through ours. We want to see supermarkets return to being drug-free. We actually probably should all get into the habit of saying drug rather than alcohol. About half of the marketing is spent on sponsorship. And there's nothing better in New Zealand to sponsor than, of course, the All Blacks. The All Blacks have been referred to as New Zealand's soul. And in fact, our soul has been sold to Lion Nathan for another 4 years. There's been another contract just recently signed. And here's Steve Chu telling us just how important alcohol is to the health and well-being of New Zealand and New Zealanders. The key thing here is that we've got to understand we are being targeted by these companies. What we want to see is introduction of a New Zealand version of the French Loire et Vin. In France, they have the same rules for alcohol as they have for tobacco. So there's no alcohol advertising on television, radio, cinema, and we'd like to see that extended to billboards and internet advertising if we could. There's no alcohol promotion of sporting activities or cultural events. We want to see the same. And the limited advertising that is allowed has to be just on the product. So there's no selling sex, there's no selling a lifestyle or values. And of course, the marketing of alcohol at youth is explicitly prohibited. So there are, in fact, I think, 4 pillars maintaining the national alcohol crisis that we have. This immensely powerful, swimmingly wealthy, I quite like that phrase, global alcohol industry, a set of quiet, passive, comfortable, middle-class, Lion Nathan shareholders. Actually, Lion Nathan, I don't want to pick on Lion Nathan, but they're a pretty good example. There are others. Political pragmatism of governments and an idea, a pernicious idea. It is the idea that it is the individual drinkers that are causing the problem. They firstly portray alcohol as part of the good life and associate it with some of the things we've seen this evening. They link alcohol problems, secondly, with an irresponsible minority, losers who can't handle alcohol, etc., genetic predisposition. Thirdly, they always want to be seen as part of the solution. They like to be part of community groups that are working on the problem. They never, of course, admit that they might have something to do with the problem itself. And fourthly, they portray those who dare to question as neo-prohibitionists or other denigrating terms and try and marginalise them. Well, we're not going to be marginalised this time round.